Hello. Welcome once again to Off the Shelf Books on Tour. Boy, do we have a book for you today. Before She Knew Him by Peter Swanson. This is his fifth book, and boy, did he get it right. I'm almost afraid of you.
Yeah.
What a mind. Where did you ever develop the concept for this?
The concept of the killer and the neighbor and all that?
The
Or
whole
everything?
shooting match.
I don't know. I don't know where it comes from. I mean, I know I have some stories about where inspiration strikes, but sometimes it's just pops up in the head.
And then it pops out. I'm on page 250, and I'm going, aha. And by 275, I'm going, you sneaker.
Yeah, good.
And then what?
I love to hear that.
What? I mean, it sneaks up on you. It's totally logical. You think you've got it figured out,
Good.
and then you fall through a trap door.
That's what I like to hear. That's the goal.
Do,
As opposed to people telling me I had it figured out from the start.
no, and I usually do.
Good.
I mean, I read a lot, and I've
Yeah.
read a lot of books, but I've never seen this concept. I've never read, and you wove it so well.
Thanks.
You didn't get the aha. I figured it out. You got me right between the eyes.
All right.
Thank you. I think.
Yeah.
Do you outline it before, or do you just sit
No.
down and write?
I just sit down and write.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's what they call in the biz plotters versus pantsers. Have you heard this
No,
saying?
I haven't.
No. So people talk about it a lot in the mystery world, but there's two types of writers. There's the people who outline, and they're the plotters, and then there's people who fly by the seat of their pants, and they're the pantsers. So I start with a premise, and I just start writing. Now that doesn't mean I don't think ahead. I'm constantly casting ahead and thinking what might happen, but I'm not writing it down. I'm just letting it kind of go as it is. And the advantage to that is I think you can wind up with good stuff. The disadvantage is sometimes you're halfway through a book and you're like, I got nothing here.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't really know a book is done until you get to the end. There's no guarantee you have a book until, if you do this method. If you outline it, you're going to have a book. So and you get stuck. You paint yourself in a corner, and you hope you can get out of it.
Well, I didn't get painted into a corner. I got blown out of my seat. What was your final manuscript? How many pages?
I always think of it in terms of, I never look at pages, I look at word counts. I always used to think pages, but now I'm a writer, so I think word count. So I think this one was 80,000 words, which is, 300 pages or something. It was a little longer, I think, in my original manuscript, and we cut some stuff. And stuff changes. I mean, I do go back. I mean, the re-edit or the edit and then the re-edit are big, big deals.
Is it painful when you turn it in and they cut something else out?
It's all painful. It's all painful. I mean, the first thing that happens is it goes to my agent, and my agent is a very editorial agent, which is great, but he just skewers me. So, and he's just a guy. He's turned me into the writer I am, but he never says anything nice about my books. If he doesn't say something, it means he likes it. But he comes back and he says, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, make this better. And it hurts because you always, no matter how many times I've been through this, I always think I'm going to send him a manuscript and he's going to be like, oh, how'd you do it? Perfect on the first go. But it doesn't happen that way. And so that's a tough edit to kind of please him. And then we go back and forth. And then by the time my editor gets it, my actual editor at the publishing house, he doesn't do too much. Editors don't do what they used to do. There's this image of editors in the old, working with F. Scott Fitzgerald, getting down on the floor and making, was it William Shawn, the great editor, really working with writers. Editors nowadays are part editors, part marketers, part salesmen. So it's a slightly different job.
Well, I know they have formulas that a children's book can only have so many pages and a teenage novel can only have so many pages.
So the rule on thrillers, the general guideline is 70 to 90,000 words as a thriller. I have a problem with this because a lot of my favorite thrillers, I think back, And then there were none by Agatha Christie, arguably the greatest thriller ever, 55,000 words. Rosemary's Baby, one of the great thrillers, is about 60,000 words. Obviously I look into this because I have these memorized, and I sometimes think a really good thriller sometimes should be a little bit shorter. It depends on what it is. If there's a lot going on, you can get up there and maintain the suspense. But you know, sometimes I wish I could write shorter thrillers. This one came in naturally at 320 pages.
I
or
don't
whatever
know how
it
you get
was.
everybody in those pages there. I would have expected that with the characters, the shenanigans that went on, the
Yeah.
comings and goings, that it would have. But I think that's what made it interesting. It wasn't a slow read.
Yeah, good, thanks. That's what I like to hear.
Set in Boston,
Yeah.
around Boston.
Around Boston.
Mm-hmm. You're very familiar with the area.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Massachusetts, so I grew up in the suburbs, Carlisle, just outside of Concord, and I've lived outside of Boston now for 25 years. So most of my books are set either in Boston, some are set in southern Maine. That's just another area I know well because when you grow up in Massachusetts, or at least when I did, you vacation in one of two spots. You either go north to southern Maine or you go to Cape Cod. And we went to Wells Beach in Maine.
And we go to Higgins.
Yep. So there, I mean, there's this limit. So I know that place well, and I think it's a good place to set a thriller.
Mm-hmm. And historically, I get a lot of history books. In Maine and Massachusetts were once one,
Yep.
and they're very, very connected.
Yep.
Very connected, which doesn't surprise me, but I'm amazed at how often the similarities pop up from book to book.
Right. Right. So this one is in West Dartford, Mass, which is not a real place, but it's sort of somewhere between maybe a Maynard, Mass, and a West Concord, something like that.
Where all the private schools are.
Yes, because there's a teacher at a private school, and I really had this image. I mean, again, when I'm talking about premises, along at that point when I'm thinking about a premise, I'm also thinking about two things: also who, but where. Like, is this going to be a city book? Is this going to be a country book? It's almost always Massachusetts because that's what I write about. And also, what season is it going to be, and what's it going to feel like and look like?
And does wife read it before you send it to publisher?
Wife does read it. I have to say, on this particular book, we were sitting on the couch and she was reading, and at one point she turned to me and said, "I don't know what's happening in your head anymore."
There you go. I'm right there with her.
I think it was a Richard section, and I think but in general, I mean, you know, my wife knows me, and she knows that, like most writers, I lead a very dull and unexciting life. That does not have any resemblance whatsoever to what happens in my books.
Do you write alone in a dark room or at the kitchen table or wherever you are?
I have an office. Strangely enough, I have a desk in my office that I've never sit at. I sit at the couch across from the desk because I put the laptop on my lap. And I write in the mornings, and my cat comes and sits next to me almost always, so my co-writer. And
Is that where vinegar came from?
Yeah, I always put a cat in my books. Slightly different cat, my cat. But yeah, I don't do coffee shops. I don't do kitchen tables. I do an office with the blinds drawn. I don't do some beautiful view. I don't understand why people would want to write with a beautiful view. And I write in the mornings, and in the afternoons I usually go for a walk. Try and move my legs a little.
I take a nap.
Oh, I do that too.
How do you choose the names of the culprits, the non-culprits, and the people who didn't make it? Do they pop into your head? Do you suffer over them? Do you have to remember you didn't use them in another book?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I try not to reuse names. I mean, I'm at a certain point, you know, if I had a major character, like Lily is my biggest character in Kind Worth Killing, I'm probably not going to name another character Lily. So I avoid those names. And then I also avoid the names of like close friends because I don't want them to get weirded
Do they
out.
ever suspect you or challenge you that you wrote about them?
No, I don't. I mean, I think people have caught little things here and there, and they've let me know. But in general, with names, if they're a major character, I think about it. I think I've already thought a lot about them. So I think about who their parents are. I think about where they grew up. I think about, when were they born, what type of name would they have, and eventually one just hits right. And I do a little bit of research. I mean, I used to have a baby book that I kept by my desk for years just to flip through for names, but now you can just go online and you can look up great things like top 10 most popular names 1940 in Maine. I mean, it's incredible what they have, and you can come up with interesting names. The small people, there's a lot of when you write a thriller, there's a lot of people in the book who just are water carriers. I mean, they're moving the plot along, and sometimes I just turn to my my bookshelf and I look for a first name and a last name, and I hook them up. So, and I have mystery books. So if you ever see like an Agatha Parker, it's probably an Agatha Christie novel and Robert Parker.
And the title,
Yeah,
did you title it or did they?
they did.
Did they? Yeah. What did you call it originally?
What was this one called? Oh, I liked it. Friends You Haven't Met. It was either a friend you haven't met or friends you haven't met, and I was going off that that saying, which is a stranger is a friend you haven't met, and I thought it was a kind of ironic title, and basically my editor was like, well, it doesn't sound like a thriller. I said, well, give it a dark cover, and then it'll look like a thriller. No, I was happy with this one. It was okay. Let me tell you that if anyone out there watching this has noticed, there is a trend in thrillers that are showing up in the libraries and the bookstores. First it was the girl books, Girl on the Train, Gone Girl, The Girl Left Behind. And then now it's women books, but one of the things they wanted in this book was this pronoun, she, because they wanted it sort of identifiable with that trend of books. Because what people don't realize is titles and covers are marketing, and generally they don't want authors to be part of the marketing.
Really?
That's my experience. I mean, maybe different authors have different experiences, but at my publishing house, and they're not callous about it. If I hated a title, they won't use it, but they really see this as marketing and trying to, and I love this cover actually, and trying to direct it toward a certain type of reader.
Well, that's why we feature it center stage and all through the program.
Yeah.
Because I find that people don't necessarily remember the title.
Yeah, but they might remember the cover.
They remember the cover, and a lot of the authors are choosing their own covers. Many of them use a personal photograph that they've taken.
Really?
Yes.
See, now that would not fly where I live. No.
You'd have to step over blood.
Yeah. No, and actually I don't want to design my own covers because there are cover designers out there that's their job.
And they follow the trends.
They do follow the trends.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
A writer.
Really?
Well, a writer or a teacher, or, I was a reader. That's how I became a writer. So I was an avid reader, voracious reader growing up. And I knew that whatever I would do would have something to do with reading and writing, with books. So whether that was a teacher, a librarian, someone in the publishing industry, work in a bookstore. I worked in a bookstore for years. Books are what I love. So. And
who do you read when you're not writing?
I read all sorts of stuff, but I read primarily mysteries and thrillers. I occasionally read something outside of that genre, but if a corpse doesn't show up in the first couple chapters, I start to get bored. These days I like, I go back, I'm still reading through Ruth Rendell, who I love, the English mystery writer. These days I read Anthony Horowitz, who's come up with a couple really clever crime novels recently. He's an English writer. I read everything. I mean, I read a lot of the girl books that come out. I read The Woman in the Window. I read The Girl on the Train. I read a good book by Caroline Keepness, who's from Cape Cod. She wrote a sinister book called You, which actually got turned into a nice Netflix series. But her books are very good.
But you have to, in order to keep aware and know what's going on outside your own dull life.
Yeah.
Or you can't put it in a book.
Well, so I was recently at an event and someone said, having read my book, well, what happened to you to make you write this?
Diabolical.
Yeah. And I said, what happened to me was I read a lot. And when I was a kid, as soon as I discovered that there were dark and twisty books, and as a kid, that was, I think, Roald Dahl. I fell in love with Roald Dahl books, and he's a great kids writer, but that guy has a mean streak, dark streak. John Belair's books, anything a little edgy, even anything in the mystery realm, quickly went on to Agatha Christie, quickly went on to Stephen King. Do you know
Stephen King's afraid of the dark?
Of course he is. Because this is what people don't seem to understand. Now, I like horror movies and I write scary things, and people think that
it's your personality.
Well, they think you're not scared. Like when I say I like horror movies, someone's like, well, I can't see horror movies because they scare me. And I'm like, well, they scare me too. I just like being scared. And Stephen King, the reason he's such a good writer is because down deep, he really believes that monster's under the bed.
Yeah.
He never lost that feeling.
No.
And that's imagination.
And sometimes I wonder if today's kids will have the imagination that we grew up with.
You have to wonder.
They're so overstimulated. I watched kids get out of an elementary school yesterday, cross by the crosswalk, and start walking, and they were all hooked up to their telephones.
Yeah, it's this next generation that's even worse, because I think even 10 years, it's happening so fast. The technology is moving so fast that they're not even having a chance to study what it's doing to brains. But even 10 years ago, when Harry Potter blew up and all these kids were reading, which was an amazing thing.
I read every book because I've never in my life seen children standing at Barnes & Noble at midnight for a book. And I think she respected their brain.
Oh, yeah.
And she'd have 5 $50 words in every sentence.
Yep.
But she explained it so well in the sentence, they didn't even have to go look it up. They knew what it meant by the time they got to the end of the sentence.
So that makes me feel better about the future of readers. But I think even though some of those kids, because this was now 10 years ago, some of those kids hadn't been raised on the devices that did all, the bells and whistles constantly.
But they can read books on the devices now too.
Yeah, but are they? That's the question.
They gave me a Kindle, and I read 7 books in one night. I didn't retain anything.
Oh, interesting. I don't read. I only read books.
Yep.
I'm not opposed to the electronic devices. I mean, I understand they deliver the same content, but you're arguing. You're saying they don't.
It just didn't work for me.
Okay.
I need the tactile experience.
Yeah, me too.
I need to see the word and imprint it on my brain and
Me too.
put the sentence together. So the poor Kindle gathers dust.
Yeah, so does mine.
Are you working on another book?
Always, yeah.
Who are you attacking this time?
Oh, so my next book, it's called 8 Perfect Murders, and it's about a book. It's a very bookish book. I guess you would call it a bibliophile mystery. It's about a bookstore owner who runs a used mystery bookstore in Beacon Hill. And years earlier, he had made a list where he picked the books, his favorite books that have the most perfect murders. So like Strangers on a Train by Pat Highsmith, The ABC Murders by Agatha Christie. Years have passed, and an FBI agent knocks on his door and says, it looks like someone's using your list to kill people. So it's got a lot of murders, and his list was called 8 Perfect Murders. So it's a book you'll really like if you like books. And also, it's got some very devious secrets.
Oh, will you bring it back for us?
Of course I would.
Oh, please do. Do you ever research to see if anybody, and I can tell you nobody used this genre before, to see if they do? I had a book one day here, and that night I went home, and on television there was the story that had been the genesis for the book. Do you ever research that? And I don't know how you would.
You mean do I pull
to see if anybody else used the same ideas, the same twists and turns?
I mean, first of all, I think in some ways everything's kind of been done to a certain degree.
Well, that's what I thought until I read your book.
You got to do it right. You got to do it different.
Yeah.
And I actually think my setup in my book is a familiar setup that's happening, which is two neighbors. Someone suspects the neighbor of a murder, and those books tend to be, is that person a murderer or not? Is the person who suspects it losing their mind? And as soon as I had that premise, I said, well, that's not the book I want to write. I want to write a different book, and in fact, I give away very early on that the guy she's living next to is a murderer. It's given away in chapter 2 at the beginning. So it has different ideas, but I do think there are similar books to that. I think I look around. There are some writers who, when they're writing a thriller, won't read thrillers because they don't want to absorb different ideas. I'm happy to sort of read what other people have read on written on the subject. I feel like I'm a little bit of a magpie. I like to grab a little bit here and there.
And you don't want to fall into a pothole either.
Well, yeah, and I always want to do something different. So I'm always thinking, what can I do here that will upend expectations?
Well, you're going to read for our audience a page from your book.
Yep.
And I'm going to sit here with my mouth closed, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Thanks. So what I'm going to read is a page from the first chapter of Before She Knew Him. The book opens with two couples meeting at a neighborhood block party. They're new neighbors. On one side we have Hen and Lloyd, on the other side we have Matthew and Mira. And they've decided to get together for a dinner party because they're kind of the only childless couples in this neighborhood. So at the end of this dinner party, they're getting the tour of the house, and Hen, the main character, at least in this chapter, is looking at Matthew's study, and she sees an object that scares her, and it makes her think she knows more about Matthew than she did before. So this is them doing the tour. There was a fireplace, and Lloyd was asking if it worked as Hen scanned the objects along the mantel. It was an odd assortment: a small brass snake, wooden candlesticks, a miniature portrait of a dog, an illuminated globe, and in the middle, a trophy, the figure of a fencer in mid-lunge on top of its silver pedestal. For one terrible moment, Hen thought she might faint. Her vision blurred, and her legs felt as though water were rushing through them. Then she gathered herself. It's probably just a coincidence, she said to herself, stepping forward to look at the inscription on the base of the trophy. Third place épée, she read. Then, in smaller script, it looked like Junior Olympics, and a date she couldn't make out. She didn't want to get too close to it. She turned, and in what she hoped was a normal voice, asked Matthew, "Do you fence?" "God, no," he said. "I just like the trophy. I bought it from a yard sale." "You okay, Hen?" Lloyd asked, looking with alarm at her face. "You look kind of pale." "Oh, yes, I'm fine. Tired, I think." The two couples congregated again in the front hall to say their goodbyes. Hen could feel the blood moving back into her face. "It's just a fencing trophy. There must be thousands of them," she told herself, as she praised the dinner again and thanked them for the tour, all while Lloyd had one hand on the doorknob, trying to escape. Mira swept in and kissed Hen on the cheek, while Matthew, behind her, smiled and said goodbye. She might have been imagining it, but Hen thought he seemed to be intently watching her.
And that's just a taste. There's a history before,
Yep.
during, and after. And if you like a thriller, if you like a mystery, and if you like to get caught off guard, Before She Knew Him by Peter Swanson is the book to read. That's it for Off the Shelf Books on Tour. Thanks for being with us. Bye now.